Good evening, George. It's Jesse once again, and I welcome you to the Ivory Tower Collections game room. Again, sitting here beside me, this is your Atari 5200 console, and it is complete. It is done. It is ready to go home and be enjoyed once again. So let's talk a little bit about this project, because we had some last-minute things that got tossed in, and there was quite a bit involved. So for starters, you sent the console to me, of course, to give it a once-over, just to make sure everything was working with it properly, and also to do a little preventive maintenance on it, in addition to providing some upgrades to it. And all of that has been done. I didn't find any initial issues with your console, other than the fact that, of course, it arrived with some minor shipping damage that you've seen in some pictures. Most of the damage was actually present on the RF shielding, with a section that's in the back. But as luck would have it, that entire section actually gets removed when I do the AV upgrades on a 5200 anyway, so that part didn't even matter. The other part of the damage that occurred was actually on the corner of your console right up here. Now, luckily, the piece that was broken off in shipping was a single piece, and I was able to put it back into place and use some epoxy to reattach it to the console. Now, it's not perfect. Obviously, if you look at it, you'll be able to see where the cracks are. Also, I noticed that due to the way that it was damaged, it actually bows out just a tiny bit in that spot. But I think once you've got the top shell placed back on it, you'll never even know it was there. In fact, it's probable that even if I hadn't have reattached this, that entire section would have been covered up for the most part by the front shell, by the front cover. So not a big deal, but went ahead and took care of that. Aside from that, there wasn't any other physical damage with the console that I could really see. Oh, I take that back. The channel select switch. So as you saw in the pictures, the original channel select switch somehow also got completely sheared off and broken internally on the switch. So I had to replace that, and I ended up just taking another channel select switch off of one of my 5200 donor parts boards to get that changed out. I actually had to do that, even though you're not going to be using the RF much. I had to do that initially just to test everything else in the console to make sure everything was working properly. Because I don't do any other work unless I know the console in stock condition is functioning the way it should. So with all that, with those minor repairs out of the way, initial diagnostics was done and checked out. And again, I didn't see any issues. I did have to do some very minor tweaking on the Pokey trimmer adjustment pot over here. But it wasn't off by much. So once I got that dialed in, I also went ahead and put a little Sharpie marker on the dial itself, in addition to part of the PCB that it sits on, just so it's easier visually to kind of line it up in the future. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of any kind of repairs and adjustments that were needed. I did also notice that there were problems with the RF output. It did work, but it was a very horrible snowy picture. It was also very, very noisy, full of static. Normally when I encounter that, I will replace the original audio capacitors that handle that, and I did do that on yours, but it didn't initially improve things. So I also further tweaked the audio induction coil, which is the little red tower that's hiding under the RF shield here right now. And I adjusted it perfectly bang on to factory specifications. Unfortunately, it still occasionally comes up with very staticky, noisy sound. Honestly, I think the issue and the fault lies in the RF modulator itself at this point. But since you don't really plan to use it beyond this point going forward, and when you see everything in action, you probably won't, it's just not that big of a deal or worth the time really to try to sink into it. And I don't really have any good known working 5200 RF modulators, because they usually get removed, or some of the consoles that I receive in for upgrades already had it removed from a previous upgrade and I'm putting in something better. So it's just not something I have 100%. And of course, you've already seen some pictures of this, but we also have a new blue power LED in place as well. Aside from that, the big star of the show for your 5200 is, of course, the Sophia upgrade. So you purchased the Sophia through Brewing Academy because they had that really cool deal going on in September, which was really nice. And I also ordered some machine pin 40-pin sockets to better fit the Sophia setup into it, because the Sophia does have round connection pins or header pins that plug into things. So yeah, I've removed the GTIA chip from off of your 5200, and I've installed the new machine 40-pin socket in place, and your Sophia board plugs perfectly into that because it's supposed to. It's the same kind of setup. That Sophia board actually replaces your GTIA chip. So it's like a GTIA replacement as well as the new video output. And per your request, it has been wired up specifically to provide us with component level video. So on the back of the console, you have the standard RCAs for red, blue, and green. Now I will tell you right now that the green RCA jack, although it's gold plated like the others, it's not quite exactly the same type of jack, and honestly, I just think it's really difficult to get green RCAs because that's how they come from console 5. That's where they're the only place I know of in the US where I can easily get the 3 different colored jacks I need for component setups like this. So yeah, the green jack is a little bit different looking from the other 2, but it works all the same, of course, and I've lined it up as well as possible with everything else, so it should look pretty good. And then next to that, you have a TRRS jack, or a 3.5mm output jack, specifically for the audio. And again, that's just because there's really not enough room on that expansion plate for 5 RCA jacks, at least not to properly fit everything side by side. As it is, these cables are pretty tight with very little room in between them when they're plugged in. So that's just kind of the compromise that has to be made in this case when setting up so many RCA jacks like that. So beyond that, you also sent along your BBPro adapter for the 5200, and yes, you have one of the new version adapters. I can tell for 2 reasons. One is that your adapter is actually a little taller than mine. Mine is about half this height, which isn't really a problem, but I guess people complained sometimes that the adapter, if it came loose when they were unplugging it from the console, it was more difficult to reach in there and get it. So I guess Evie made it a little taller to accommodate for that. Also, mine also has a little slide switch on it like yours, but instead of it being in the lower corner and moving up and down, mine is up here towards the top and moves left to right instead. But other than that, it's pretty much the same. So I did apply the solder jumper bead on this, letting it know that we are using the spare wire reset method on your console, because I did install an extra wire modification that basically attaches to an unused pin on the cartridge port and runs back to the reset signal switch on one of the IC chips inside the console. And Evie designed her back bit to be able to utilize that. So to make it work, you put in the wire, you make sure that this little toggle switch on the back side of the board is in the down position for you, and then I just had to apply a little bead of solder over the jumper that says we're using the spare wire reset method. And it works great, and you'll see that, of course, in this video. So yes, I'll be using my back bit with your adapter on the 5200 so that you can see that. You also, of course, sent along your controllers with the rebuild kits from Atari Repair Parts, and it's actually a really good thing you sent your controllers, because what I discovered after I put the rebuild kits into place is both of your controllers were still off kilter. Long story short, one had a difficult time trying to move up, and the other one had a difficult time trying to move to the right. I have no way of knowing that, so I always adjust these things to the factory specifications and just go from there. But if you hadn't sent these and you had put the rebuild kits in yourself, you would have had issues with the controllers not working in all the directions, and you would have emailed me and I would have heard about it. So it's a very good thing you sent them in, because I was able to adjust the internal pot arms inside of each of the controllers to get them calibrated and matched up as well. It's not as common to have to mess with the controllers in this regard, but sometimes it is necessary to make things work 100%. And again, I will show you all of that as well. Okay, other things. You had requested that I remove the original RF cable. Here it is. Now, the original RF cable is soldered to the main board, but if you want to use RF again, you can pretty easily, and I'll show you real quick. So I'm going to be providing with your console a replacement RF cable. This is actually from like a 4-switch 2600. And the reason why these are good is because they are truly shielded RF cables like Atari would have used. But one end has a male RCA that's been cut off appropriately, and that's because you may or may not have noticed when you took the console apart, there's actually an RCA jack that stands up vertically over here by the main filter capacitor. That is an actual RF output jack that does work. Why Atari installed it on the 4-port, I have no idea, since they ended up not using it. My guess, if I was to hazard, is that originally Atari always intended to have 2 separate cables on the 5200, just like the 2600, just like the 7800, just like their computers. But in the last minute of things, somebody decided to come up with the brilliant idea of the auto switch box and to be able to supply power and everything through a single cable, and to make sure that that never got yanked or loose because it was providing power to the console, they had to solder it to the board. So that said, if you ever want to use RF again, you just have to take the cover off, take this other cable, just plug it in to the top of the RCA like that, and then just wrap it back down through underneath the motherboard and back out through one of the slots, and you can have functioning RF output. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate the RF output here in this video, but it does work still. But that's how you can attach that. So again, you'll be getting both the original RCA cable as well as this replacement old stock 2600 cable. I got a stockpile of these, no big deal, that I'll send back. In addition, we have a lot of parts with this setup. So first, there is the bag that contains all of the old parts that I removed from your controllers. So it's basically just all the original rubber membrane components and the boots, because I did go ahead and install the new boots. And then on this other bag, these would be the parts that I took off of the 5200 as part of the preventive maintenance work, as well as installing the Sophia. Also, I'm returning and including the DVI output ribbon and DVI output connector that came with the Sophia. Anyway, you'll be getting that back. You'll be getting back the capacitors that were replaced out, which included the main large filter capacitor. The power conversion actually changes this giant capacitor to a tiny one as part of the setup, so don't freak out too much about that. That's just how that gets done. As well as your original GTIA chip is in a separate anti-static bag that is marked. So if you ever need it again, it's here because it does function. Wow. Okay. I think that just about covers everything, doesn't it? Again, there was a lot that was kind of done to your console. So with that, George, let's get this camera changed around and let's take a look at the output this thing puts out now on component through my AV setup here in the tower game room. We'll be right back. George, I have the camera pointed at my OLED here in the game room. I've got your 5200 up and connected up through component. Now keep in mind again, my AV setup here is going to be a little bit different from yours, but it should be comparable. I have the component output connected up into my Extron, and then in turn that goes into my OSSC, which then eventually goes back out to my TV. Now I actually have both of your controllers actually connected up to the 5200, so you can actually see everything working with your stuff. So let's go ahead and power on the console. Now I am going to start with the diagnostics really quick. And here we are. The Atari PAM Final System Test, Revision 1.1. Now, this particular set of diagnostics isn't the coolest or prettiest thing to see, and that's mainly because it's very boring. Well, it's just a diagnostic program. But I have to use the version 1.1 diagnostic because it was the latest version that works properly on the 4-port console. So I'm just going to go through the suite of the tests really quick. We're going to start with the in-video test. Now this is a test that's basically testing the graphic output capability of the Antic and the GTIA chip. And remember, the Sophia has replaced the GTIA, so it's an important test to run. Again, it doesn't look like much, but what we're looking for in this test is we're making sure that we have these 4 fat bars here that are different colors. Then we have 4 skinnier bars of the same preceding colors. And then up here along the top, we have these little rectangular sections of like opposing colors that are supposed to be in place, which is there. And then we're supposed to see this like this V and the inverted V setup that we have here. Again, not the most impressive thing, but it's utilizing a couple of different graphic modes that utilize both of the chips to do that. That then takes us to the color bars. Now, as the name would imply, this is showing you all of the colors of the console, but similar to other diagnostic tests, we're supposed to check for the accuracy of the colors that are being presented. Now, something that's very important about the Sophia is that because it is a GTIA video replacement system, there is a trim pot on the 5200 to adjust colors. However, that trim pot no longer functions. So the color output coming from the console is 100% hard-coded on the RGB output on the Sophia itself. But I'm mentioning this because these 2 bars right here, this kind of this brown, this gold here, and maybe a little darker gold up above with the gray line in between, those are supposed to look the same color, but obviously they don't. This one's a little more of a darker color than the bottom one. Now, honestly, the same thing would happen on an actual console because it's on a modern display. Again, this is a 4K OLED that we're looking at this on. Modern TVs just handle the colors a little bit differently. So this would have happened regardless, even through RF. But aside from that, we're supposed to see all the different varying shades. So we have, you know, basically the same color here at the top that's kind of starts off here at the bottom as well, and then we should have all these other gradients in between. I don't know how well my camera will capture them, but I can definitely see them here. Then that takes us to the gray bars test. And this is just like it says. It's just displaying a grayscale set of bars. But you will notice that there's some weird looking graphical glitching going on down here at the bottom. That is nothing to be worried about. The same thing happens on an actual GTIA chip on an actual 5200. This also happens on the 8-bit Atari computers. I'm not sure what this is, but the original Atari output was actually demonstrating and displaying all of this information, but televisions back in the day did not display everything along the top or the bottom. They also cut off on the sides a little bit. So what you're seeing is extra stuff that was always present in the signal but couldn't be seen on a television. In fact, this bright white line at the top, that's not supposed to be there. That's not something you're ever supposed to see, but it is there and it is present. You're just supposed to see the black and then the gray to the white. So again, you're seeing extra stuff that the console is putting out normally, but it was cut off on CRTs. The port test. Now, normally I would go through this and show you the port test, which uses my little special loopback board, but I'm not going to here because there's really not a lot to see. But basically, when I run the port test, I plug in a special diagnostic board to all 4 controller ports, and the system will automatically run through a series of quick tests. And if anything is off kilter with the controllers, or with those ports I should say, and their functionality, it will then give me error codes to tell me this. But your console passes fine. There's nothing to show, so it's kind of it's really a boring test. But what I can show you is test number 5, which is called the Pokey adjustment test. Now this is actually the test I use to dial in the Pokey trimmer. And specifically, when I plug in my special loopback test board, it provides me with fairly static values. Notice how these numbers shift a little bit? That's because we have controllers plugged into them, and the numbers, you know, it's an analog reading. It's not 100% digital. So they do fluctuate a little bit. But with your controller currently in place, and it's pretty close to where it needs to be. This is about center on the controller, right about there. With the actual loopback test board in place, this horizontal port 1 reading is supposed to read 112 plus or minus 1. And right now I've got the controller centered and we're reading 113. So it's in spec. It's exactly where it needs to be. And with my loopback board in place, it actually does say 112 and flickers back and forth lightly between the 112 and the 113 every so often. So that was the adjustment I made, but then I also had to adjust your controllers themselves. Now you'll notice that the port 2 controller has completely different readings. Doesn't matter. Each one of the controller ports ends up with a different set of readings. The only ones that we are concerned with is making sure that this horizontal value for port 1 is around 112 plus or minus 1, because all of the other ports and the numbers that they represent and show are based off of that. So as long as that one's correct, all the others are good to go as well. The other thing this test does is it allows me to use each of the keypad buttons, and it will show me as I push them here. The problem with this test is that the buttons, with the exception of the numbers, will show letters instead of what they actually are. That's because the 5200, basically being a child of the 8-bit computer line, they're actually using some of the 8-bit computer keyboard strokes to emulate the keypad on the controller itself. I've got another test I'll show you a little bit later that works a lot better for this. Test 6 is the tone test. Now, what this does is it's going to allow us to check all 4 voices of the Pokey chip. Now, the Pokey has 4 voices, but it only has a single audio output pin, so it is mono. But it can do 4 voices simultaneously. And when it's asking for a register, it wants me to choose one of the voices. So I'm just going to choose a 1, and I'm going to press start, and we will hear some tones. And then I can go through and just execute the test again, telling it to do voice 2. Again for voice 3. And last for voice number 4. Okay. So again, no problems there. And then the last test that I can really show you is the RAM test. Now, this is also an incredibly boring test. By the way, before I get off the screen, notice how it says error summary and we've got some numbers and such here. On the other tests, like the port test that I was talking about, this same screen comes up. And when it's going through the test, if there is an issue, if it detects a problem, it gives me a numeric code value in the error summary and increases this is actually the error counter. So if there was an error, it would tell you how many errors it found. But again, when I run the test on your console, this just remains blank because there's no errors. There's no issues. But the RAM test is a similar type deal. So I'm going to run it. It's going to test 16K, and it's just going to sit here. Like you see, it's not going to do anything. If everything tests okay, then it's eventually going to return us to the ready prompt here where the square is. We'll just have that little caret symbol. There we are. The little greater than symbol. Caret, whatever. So no issues with the RAM. If there had been, it would have given me an error code or a numeric value in the error display that would have told me potentially which bank or which chip I needed to check to confirm things were good to go. So there we are. That's the basic diagnostics. Again, I know it's not the most terribly fun thing to see, but there it is. And that's using an actual diagnostic cartridge. Now let me get my back bit with your adapter plugged in, if I can. I can't see what I'm doing here. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and fire up the back bit cartridge. Here we are. Now again, this is my back bit cartridge with your adapter. So the first thing to show you on this is to show you that the soft reset does indeed work. So if you push the little button on the top of the back bit cartridge now, it's going to reset and take you back to the menu. And you can do this while you're in the middle of playing a game as well. So it's really cool. It's really nice to be able to put that quick little modification in place. It just really improves the overall usage of the adapter. Okay, first thing we're going to do is, it was really cool and everything to hear those little test tones, but let's really hear some music. Let's really hear what the Pokey can do. Now, I've already sent you a quick video demo of the same thing, but let's check it out here. So with that out of the way, let me show you something else that shows the controller operation a little bit better. So this is a separate little controller test program. This is actually ripped out of the Altera emulator. And what's cool about it is we can see the controllers. And it gives me a better visual representation of what the controllers are doing. So I've got the controller in port 1 here, and as I move the controller stick around, we can see that it moves a little cursor. But I can also visually see the buttons. So here's the lower fire button, here's the upper fire button, which was completely not working on your original Mylar strips. Here's the lower button and upper right fire button on the opposite side of the controller, so both sets of fire buttons are working. And then we have the number keys. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, star, 0, and pound sign. And then we have the start, pause, and reset buttons as well. Now you'll notice that when I push the 6, it shows up for both ports 1 and 2. This is not a problem with the console. This is actually a glitch with the software. It was not designed to run on an actual 5200. It was designed to run in the emulator. Now if I take your other controller that's in port 2, you can see that it too is working 100%. There's the lower fire, there's the upper fire on one side. The left side actually. Here's the lower right fire and the upper right fire. So again, both sets of fire buttons are now functioning properly. Here's the keypad, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, star, 0, and pound sign. And again, start, pause, and reset, all working. Now, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to unplug these and put them into the other ports. I will tell you that one of these controllers is really tough to plug in. I think it's fairly new and hasn't been used much, because there's not a lot of wear on the controller port. Okay, I just plugged them into ports 3 and 4. You can now see we've got cursor movement there. So there's the there's controller port 3. Again, the fire buttons are fully functioning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, star, 0, pound sign, start, pause, reset. And again, if we go to the 4th controller, it's working properly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, star, 0, pound sign. Forgot to check those fire buttons. There's lower left fire, upper left fire, lower right fire, upper right fire, and start, pause, reset. So yeah, no problems with the controllers. They are now working 100%. They're almost like brand new controllers at this point, which is the whole point of getting them rebuilt. So you should be quite happy with that. If you're forced to have to use the controllers, there you go. They are definitely working. Let me reset, and it's time to take a look at some other stuff. Good test of the controllers is with the game Bounty Bob Strikes Back. This is a very picky game with controllers and with the Pokey adjustments being proper. So let me go ahead and fire it up. And I'm going to go ahead and start the game. Now the biggest thing with this is that the controllers are off kilter, then it will be real difficult to move Bounty Bob to the right and to the left. Usually what happens is you'll be able to move him one way and he won't move to the other. But in this case, I've got him moving back and forth just fine. The other problem can be when trying to move up and down between the teleporters, between floors, sometimes it'll be easy to push up to go back up something, but then you have a difficult time climbing down a ladder, for instance. So let me go ahead and just, let's see if I can blow through this. So you saw that with Bounty Bob, it was controlling just fine. Another game that can be incredibly picky with controller functions is Gyrus. So of course this is based on the arcade game, where you basically move around in a large circular arc to take out the enemies. Well, this is another game where if the controller isn't calibrated right, or if the system's calibration isn't right, then it's very difficult to move the ship completely around. What will happen is, you'll find that you might get stuck like in one corner and you can't get it to go beyond that. But as you can see here, no problems. This thing is moving all over the place just like I want it to. And I guess, let's see, okay, one of my favorite games on the 5200 to play is Blaster. Now this was an unreleased prototype that's basically finished but never got released. And I don't know if you can still do this, but Atari Age actually made me this cartridge many, many years ago. But this may have been one of the victims during the Great Purge of July 2023. But anyway, it's basically it's essentially a sequel to Robotron, except that it kind of takes place from a three-dimensional perspective. So check it out. The idea in the first stage is to survive and dodge the robots and fly through the little arches when you can see them. Eventually the level will just end and you'll go on to the next stage. And then last, I will show you this really cool homebrew port of Bosconian to the 5200. This was designed for the Atari Max Ultimate SD cartridge, but it also works quite well on the back bit with the 5200 adapter, as you will see.
alive, alive. Alive, alive. Alive, all. Alive, alive. Alive, all. Alive, alive.
Well, there you go, George. Your 5200 is looking excellent, I gotta say. But again, I have one of these Sophia boards in my personal 5200. I have it wired up for VGA, but it's basically the same quality of output. So it's always amazing to see what, you know, is possible with some of the more modern technology incorporated. But George, with that, I do thank you. Again, the plan from here is I'm going to try to get your console boxed back up and everything tonight. I have a slightly larger but not quite as tall box that I'm going to put everything into that I think everything will be able to fit and get it prepped and ready to send back your way. I will be using UPS because the United States Postal Service has been absolutely horrible in my state for the last couple of months. They've almost lost a couple of packages, and in fact, I've got a customer who sent a console to me earlier this week, and there's been no tracking on it for the last 3 days, and it was supposed to have been here by now. So they're obviously not happy. I can't do anything about it because it's in the post office's hands. And you know, obviously that service request will be delayed until I receive it. So yes, it'll be UPS. I will of course provide you with a link for this video. As usual, it will be unlisted, but you can share the URL with anyone you wish. And of course, you'll have the full suite of pictures that I will provide to you in the email as well. Outside of that, once I get the console shipped out, possibly tomorrow, that's actually my goal, then I will send you another email with the tracking information as well as the full invoice with everything that's been discussed about and been done. So George, again, thank you for reaching out and for having this project. This has been a fun project. I always like working on something a little bit different from the usual, and the 5200 certainly qualifies from time to time. And obviously, when we're ready for other projects in the future, we'll start scheduling and getting that planned out, and we'll go from there. So George, if I don't talk to you again between now and the end of the year, I do wish you a good, happy, and safe holiday season. And thank you once again. Have a good rest of your weekend.